I want to talk about the reaction to Arsenal so early on, and I mean so early on in the season. There is a lot going on in the Premier League at the moment in terms of change, but Arsenal in particular have got quite a polarised opinion surrounding them at the moment. And a lot of people who are doing this polarising opining are not necessarily acting, I think, in the most honest fashion. And I want to kind of lay out how. Arsenal's first couple of results have really not that bad, at least if you look at the results. There are elements I think you can unpack, and there are elements I think that could improve and will probably, in fact, most definitely improve. But overall, I think Arsenal aren't actually in all that bad a shape. And I want to tell you why. So stick around. If you haven't already subscribed, you can hit the button down there, or at the end of the video, you can do it yourself then when you're more convinced. Let's talk about the lineups yesterday. 2-2 against Fulham. What went right, what went wrong, and why Arsenal are lining up like this. Thomas Partey on the right-hand side. Kiwior on the other side, which I actually really like. Ben White, obviously, in centre of defence. And then this midfield, which is clearly changing a lot at the moment. And a front line, which I'm only really confused about the middle. And even then, my confusion is really, why isn't there someone else in the club apart from Trossard and obviously the injured players at the moment? And obviously I think Nketiah is there. But there's something else to discuss there, right? The overall lineup still, as they line up, broadly looks the same. But it isn't, is it? Like, how this team play and how last season's Arsenal played are so different. And that's going to take time. I don't understand why this Arsenal team aren't being given time. Now, to an extent, you could say, hey, it was because they got so close last season. It was because they pushed Man City until the point where basically the wheels fell off of the Arsenal charge. And even then, they were, to an extent, overachieving in the timeline, but also just overachieving in the league in general at that point. They were pushing possibly one of the greatest teams in the Premier League, and they were pushing possibly one of the greatest managers ever. But what they did have quite late on was a tactical dismantling by a couple of teams where it basically frustrated them rather than them losing. But a draw is as good as a loss in the Premier League. And that is why this Fulham game feels so annoying. Fulham, of course, lined up like this. Pretty typical for the way that Fulham line up. But what they did early on in the game was congest the centre of the pitch, get their players doing a lot of closing down of the Arsenal play. And early on, it worked really nicely. Do you know why they did this? They put themselves in the positions that the Arsenal players who are now trying to work out the new positions of the team are trying to get to would then be able to intercept the passes from those people. Hence why, in the first minute, Bukayo Saka plays a ball back to who? Well, maybe it was Ramsdale at a push. Maybe it was an underhit pass. I want to be generous like that. He kind of knows where he went wrong with that. Ramsdale then, obviously, in trying to be the new version of what Arsenal need, didn't know whether to come out. And actually, there was a point where he looked like he was sprinting towards the ball or go back and basically get into a good position as a goalkeeper. Obviously, Pereira then pounces on that, and Arsenal are down early on. The narrative overall with that is going to be, hey, Arsenal concede loads of goals early on. There's definitely something there to discuss, and I think broadly, it's quite a simple conclusion. It's not about switching on, but it is about Arsenal being a more adaptable side this season. Even if you look at their average positions here, look at how adaptable this overall team looks. And by the way, this average positions doesn't really paint the full picture of what Arsenal were trying to do. Average positions in this team, well, they don't really work the same. But what it does show is positions are changing for a lot of players within this side. And broadly, the players that they have lost are probably those more adaptable players. We're talking about Gabriel Jesus. We're talking about Timber. We're possibly even talking about the player like someone like Xhaka that they lost, who could have given them maybe more of a foothold and slightly different play to what the number 19 and number 29 are currently giving them. I will get on to the number 29 in a second because I know there are a lot of people who have got a weird discussion surrounding him. Let's look at number 19 for a second though. Quite a few light touches all over the field, quite a lot of hookup play rather than actual kind of meaningful end result sort of stuff. But at the same time, that is exactly what they want him to do. They want him to empower these two guys. No, I've not even done the heat maps for those guys. But they want him to empower this guy, and they want basically almost like two wide strikers just raining down on goals at angles, right? Go on top of that. Clearly, Martin Odegaard was given an MO in this game of you need to hang around this area, you need to target the likes of Calvin Bassey, you need to target the likes of Anthony Robertson, and stay away from this side, frankly, because you know what? At the moment, what we're trying to do is get Kai Havertz a little bit more involved in the game. But again, and this isn't only my thought, but we were talking about this even when we previewed Kai Havertz for Arsenal earlier on in the pre-season. It's like, this guy isn't going to be someone who gets on the ball all the time. He's an interstitial player, someone who locks people up, who brings people together, who has these small touches here and there, who of course is able to get on the ball and run with it, but in this side is much more of a facilitator. Now, my compatriot of mine, TDK, has analysed quite a lot of that. John, over at The Athletic, or TIFO, has also analysed quite a lot of that. And some of that is partly the fact that he needs to hook up with the new front line, right, obviously with who he's playing, and I think he's probably just a little out of practice, and at the same time learning a lot of new shapes, all those kind of things. A couple of passes going missing here and there, but also a couple of times when he's making runs, people don't know quite where they want him to be just yet, so he kind of ends up here, which I don't hate. He's an advanced 8, or probably even a 10, if we're being completely honest, or if we're being evaluative of his position. But at the moment, what he is doing is overlapping maybe a little bit too much with Trossard. There's a couple of times where they seem to get under each other's feet. There's a couple of times where they don't quite seem to have the understanding. And really what they could do with is a slightly more solid midfield base. At the moment, obviously Thomas Partey and Odegaard and Saka and probably even Ben White were told, just overload that side, get closer together, play lots of nice intricate passes, have lots of touches on the ball to build the pressure on that side of the play, target the weak Fulham players, be more adaptable than you were in those previous games, adapt to a completely different system. But of course, then when you're playing a Fulham team who are very good at adapting game for game, very good at going for punch with the big teams, this is exactly what they want you to do. They want you to have a game plan that you don't necessarily feel sure about. Now, Arsenal obviously kept plugging away. I think they had almost 3 XG, like it was 2.85 or something crazy, right? And they deserved that in this game. They should have scored more goals than they did. They should have been well ahead of this Fulham team, and they should have put them away at that time. Declan Rice, still, by the way, the heat maps of Declan Rice, anyone on that right-hand side, Martin Odegaard, Saka, Partey, Ben White, all of them targeting this area right here shows there is something there where there is an intricacy of play, possibly even people overlapping just a little bit too much and not being expansive enough within this Arsenal side, and still learning the roles that they need to be alongside. Now, I also said I wanted to mention overall that back line. I think at this point there's not a goalkeeping problem, but there is a goalkeeping conundrum which still hasn't quite been solved. I still love Ramsdale, I still think he's a great goalkeeper, but Raya is obviously a great option for them now. I'm just wondering when that kind of becomes implemented for this Arsenal side, when they can really lean into another goalkeeper, and how you can lean into another goalkeeper. That feeds into another point, right? Being sure of the people you have around you and having the injuries that they have. Obviously, if you're Saliba, you want your main centre-back partner alongside you, but Ben White's not a bad stand-in. But of course you want your main centre-back partner alongside you. Of course, if you are Ben White, or whoever is going to be the chosen centre-back on that side, you want your chosen right-back on that side. Now, Tomiyasu obviously can't play. Ben White obviously played as another right-back out there. They're clearly experimenting with bringing a midfielder in from that right-hand sided position. It's very common in the Premier League at the moment. But broadly, that doesn't worry me all that much. I don't mind that. In fact, because they're so numbers dominant, really what we're looking at is a 3-4-3. I've always loved. I think that's such a great formation. Or actually, 2 units of 5. A unit here and a unit here. And they very often will cross over, but they know that they need to get back to the areas they need to get back to. Of course, Declan Rice hugely exploiting those 2 units of 5, and he's the entry point for those 2 units of 5. Huge heat map area here, huge heat map area there. I don't think he's quite worked it out yet, what his relationship is with those people. I think it is changing all the time. I think it is improving all the time. But broadly, we know what Odegaard's position and maybe job is within the side. I think at the moment they're working out what this triangle does. And in fact, I think Martinelli probably has the most defined of all the roles there. Probably because of the goals they want him to get, but probably also because of the facilitation they want him to do. Now, on top of that, and I think this is frustrating, there is a bit of a gap here, or probably really a gap here, which really is a gap here, if that makes sense, right? And that's that's Gabriel Jesus. Jesus? Anyway. Arsenal fans should stop worrying about that. I think maybe they've undermined some of the positions they have in the side in bringing in Raya. Timber obviously is brought in to challenge people. Zinchenko would be obviously great if he could start every game and sort of be a lot more solid. But that brings me on to another player who was bought midway through last season to shore things up, to get the Arsenal way, to bring in the depth that they need. Kiwior. He has started his Arsenal life in such a great fashion, right? I mean, obviously he didn't actually start in such a great fashion because actually I think his debut was pretty weak. But he's grown into the side beautifully. I think he's perfect for this position across here. There are a lot of teams in the Premier League that would love to have him. I think that's testament to the fact that Arsenal are getting the targets and developing them into what they need them to be developing into. And that's kind of my point here. Liverpool would love a Kiwior out there. City would probably play a Kiwior out there, or at least he'd get some game time. Newcastle could probably also do with a Kiwior type, although their formation probably doesn't facilitate that. And on top of that, I think Manchester United, now they've lost Luke Shaw, would probably love someone like him. Chelsea would also probably love, but Colwell's really that player, but maybe that lets Colwell go more central. You get what I'm saying. What I'm saying is broadly, there is development going on. And that's the other aspect here. The average age of this Fulham side yesterday was around 28. The average age of this Arsenal side yesterday was 24. And 24 with 1, 2, 3, 4, really 4 players. So a third of that side, if not almost half of that side, playing in positions that they're still, Declan Rice is not learning that position, but they're still learning what they want the roles to be from that. And really, Fulham did exactly what they wanted to do. They got really nasty and gnarly centrally here. Look how narrow those wingers are. Neither of them are getting there any chalk on their boots. And that is Bobby De Cordova-Reid and obviously Andres Pereira, quite aggressive. You can see actually what's quite interesting, if you put these two heat maps over each other, you can see there that they're really just like Ben White just sat on one of them and Thomas Partey was there for a bit of a duel and then to release down here straight away. What they did, Fulham really nicely, was overload there and then, again, that's a box there. They're just working around, again, another heat map for someone like Declan Rice, for someone like Havertz. The two heat maps, if I could put the two average positions, if I could put them over each other, show that Arsenal are trying to achieve something and Fulham are trying to cancel it out. Too often, I think maybe Arsenal as a fan base sometimes are more split than any other fan base, but that's because there's very high expectations. On top of that, by the way, the reason those high expectations exist is because of the past, but also because look at the potential of this team. Look at what Mikel Arteta is trying to achieve. Frustration with a draw is insane to me. Well, it's not insane, it's perfectly reasonable, but you get what I'm saying? Like, too many people are saying sell Havertz, and maybe there are questions over where Havertz's role is within this side. Maybe the facilitation isn't all that he needs. Maybe he does need to get a foot on the ball more. Maybe he does need to be more confident in possession. Maybe there are elements where you can criticise and upgrade, and I totally understand that. But give them time. You can't just sit around and go, yeah, well, get rid of him. He's only had 3 games now. Or 2 of which I actually thought he did a really decent job in. Now, what's going to be fascinating is to see them go up against a very top-class midfield in Manchester United next week. What's going to be fascinating is to see them challenged properly by someone like Erik ten Hag in a ding-dong of a battle. But broadly, Fulham also challenged Arsenal last season as well. Broadly, Fulham and Marco Silva are that side that do this. They went and they Fulhamed. So how can you be mad at it? Well, you can be mad because of the result. But you get my point, in the Premier League this season, because of the strength in depth, look at that midfield. Lukic, Pereira, and Polinia, that's a great midfield, especially one which is looking to get more narrow, cancel out what Arsenal are trying to do in the centre of the park, cancel out the double pivot, or at least the pivot of Rice and plus 1 or 2, and cancel out that distribution. I'm just confused. At this point, I get it. Weirdly, I think the trauma is so fresh still from last season for Arsenal because they thought what they were onto was so good and is so good. But broadly, that needs to be forgotten here. The issues with this Arsenal team are changing all the time. And most of them are due to upgrading rather than being found out or not having the quality or any of these things. There is quality throughout this side. I don't understand it. I think the penalty was well generated, well dispatched. The second goal, all of it was just constantly leading to a more dominant Arsenal. And in fact, I really think we should talk about this for a second, right? Let's talk about some of these floating roles for Arsenal and the more spine type players and the concentration of play versus the sparseness of the play for Arsenal. And what that is essentially. Now, I went to a boxing match the other day, and the best analogy that I can come up with is that there are some just consistent jabs that Arsenal are looking for, right? They're looking to consistently keep you at the end of a jab. That might be a Martin Odegaard worrying you in these kind of positions. That might be Thomas Partey dominating these areas. That's maybe Arsenal working the body a little different. Then what you've got are different kinds of jabs from different players. Now, jabs, you might hang out there for a number of different reasons. First of all, it's to control the opposition team, the opposition, but also just to keep them guessing all the time. Look how light a lot of these touch maps are. Same for Trossard. Same for Fabio Vieira. Look how concentrated it is for other players in the team. Now, it's not unusual, of course, to have players who have a level of concentration of, should we say, possession in the side. But what I would say is, when you can see those players with that level of concentration, you can see that Arsenal are continually trying to start moves through those people. Those people will have very consistent patterns of play that the other players then try to play off, right? Which is why some of these heat maps overlap. But when Vieira came on, the goal came from out wide into the middle. Nketiah, one of his few touches, but one of his hottest spots on the pitch was right there where the goal came from, right? Fabio Vieira equally floating all over. They're looking for gaps, they're looking for moments, they're looking for places to get through that back line, which is why Kai Havertz actually has a slightly more spread out, but also quite concentrated area. He's trying to facilitate the Martinellis and the Trossards on that side. And then when Fabio Vieira does come on, he has a big impact. Arsenal are playing a whole 90 minutes, not just the, 15 in the beginning and 15 in, which is why it makes real sense for you to focus on, hey, in the first minute, they're really terrible here, and I get it. Like, if you solve that, you probably solve a lot of their control issues in this game. But over the whole 90, Mikel Arteta is trying to change the game state almost constantly. And that is why you've got these punches and working the body here, and that is why over here you have more sparse touches, connective tissue, if you like, but also just constantly keeping them guessing which punch are Arsenal going to throw next. And that's why Arsenal created so many XG, possibly because they're always testing the waters with these things. They're creating some of these chances, and it's not necessarily that it's the repeatable element of what they're getting here. Like, they're trying to... That was a terrible piece of English I just did there. What I'm basically saying is there is a repeatable element within this Arsenal team, but sometimes the end product comes from a moment of thought, of brilliance, of that moment, right? And that is why when people are critical of Trossard, Nketiah, Vieira, Havertz, all of these people are deliberately peripheral, but also are the kind of people with the personalities that can do these kind of things. Now, of course, there are very consistent players in here, but let's give these other guys credit. The connective guys deserve this credit. And that is where one of the goals came from for Arsenal yesterday. And probably more of the goals would have come from if there was more patience. I know they have more than enough time because it went on so long, but if there was a little more patience, and when there is more patience, I think they're going to get through. They need to bypass the press, hence why Declan Rice is constantly hot in these areas, because he's receiving the ball from, probably one of the two central defenders, right? Thomas Partey, similarly. They've got to get by this press, which is not really a press, but it's a medium block, right? But they really have to get beyond these players who are putting the pressure on the midfield there. That is a press of sorts, but not like the high gegenpressing type. That's what Fulham did, and it worked. So I'm interested to know what you guys think about that as a concept, this low touch amount and kind of the soft touches over here versus the intensity over here, the repeatable elements of the team. In the Premier League this season, I've been looking at a few heat maps, and very often I'm kind of confused. It's all right to admit when you're wrong sometimes, or that you don't know what you're doing or talking about. It would be a great thing if more people in the space did that, right? Especially for Arsenal. But the point is, just see what I'm saying? There is a reason why all of this happens, for a reason. People go into heat maps and go, terrible game. Look at him. He's too much of this. He's doing it deliberately. He's trying something. Sometimes Evel Knievel got paid for the attempt. Do you know what I'm saying? And I get it. There are weak links. There is a weakness here through some of the positions that people are being asked to play. But they're going to grow into these positions. You don't buy a player for 65 million and then go, cool, well, we'll just slot him in where he wants to slot in. It's like, he's got to learn what it is that he needs to do. And broadly, he's intelligent enough, this is Kai Havertz, to do them. In fact, there's times where I think other Arsenal players aren't actually seeing what they want him to do. So That's my frustration at the moment, right? Like, I think Arsenal overall looking all right. I think they're still looking strong. I think there are times where they look a little shaky because of the fact that they don't have their maybe first choice in this. But that's not a bad back line to go with. That midfield is probably one of the classiest midfields in the Premier League. That's why I'm interested to see what happens next week against Casemiro, against Bruno Fernandes, against a Mason Mount. Against a very functional midfield, you can kind of match each of those people. Declan Rice has to be Casemiro. Odegaard has to be Bruno Fernandes. Kai Havertz has to be Mason Mount. There is kind of a like-for-like type quality there that you can see both managers searching for. And you can see both of them very much working on their transition play, especially for this Arsenal side at the moment, and of course Manchester United. So there's equivalencies. But this adaptability, there's a reason that people keep going in for Ajax players. There's a reason they keep going in for, adaptable Brighton players, all these kind of things. It's because that's where the Premier League is moving. And the adaptability is something Arteta saw coming down the line and was working on really, really well. So, well done, Fulham. Broadly, what you always see is that results like this are in the pipeline for all teams in the Premier League this season. I think Arsenal are going to get exploited. I think Liverpool are going to get exploited. I think a lot of teams are going to have worries, wobbles, these kind of things. It looked like it was in the pipeline from the previous two results. I'm not saying that Arsenal look like, their imperious selves. But teams and seasons won't always go as they do the whole point is if we just play the Premier League season over and over and over again and we go, City will start like this, Liverpool will start like this, Arsenal will start like this, United will start like this, and then they'll tail off and they'll go up and they'll go down. Like, this Arsenal team are evolving, this Arsenal team are changing. Kind of take that into account here. Does that make sense? The fact that they aren't doing exactly the same as last season, in a sense, should probably be a good thing to Arsenal fans right now. Just get behind them. I don't understand what the problem is here. Get behind your team. This is not the time to be questioning it. Towards the end of the transfer window? Possibly. But Arsenal are very capable of doing their business. So if they've got it done, they've got it done. Fantastic. I just find it so weird. Maybe because of an injury, you might sign someone else. But outside of that, I think it's unusual to question to this degree. And I think a few people are being triggered by other analysis that's out there that is piling the pressure on, saying Arteta isn't good enough, all these kind of things, and he's going to get found out or whatever it is. And people are getting antsy and nervous, and it's weird. Very weird. Because Arsenal have a really good chance this season. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from with this. Arsenal, I think you have a great chance. I think you're evolving. I think you're changing. Some of these are maybe growing pains that you don't want to have to go through during the season. You would love it if they could have addressed a bit more of this in pre-season, seen a bit more of this coming possibly, but you can't see some of those injuries coming. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys again in a little while. Much love.